member has put the point on the record, and I know that the Prime Minister is now in her place, but we now come, before I call the Chancellor to make his statement. Just
get up and tell us. Go on.
Mr Bradshaw, I expect better. I want you to be silent while I read this out. This is very important. Before I call the Chancellor to make his statement, I would like... Does somebody... Yes, and I think so. It's a few times today. And that's the third apology. I don't want any more. Before I call the Chancellor to make his statement, I'd like to point out that British Sign Language interpretation of proceedings is available to watch on Parliament Live TV. So I now call the Chancellor of the Exchequer. Chancellor.
Mr. Speaker, the central responsibility of any government is to do what is necessary for economic stability. Behind the decisions we take and the issues on which we vote are jobs families depend on, mortgages that have to be paid, savings for pensioners and businesses investing for the future. We are a country that funds our promises and pays our debts. And when that is questioned, as it has been, this government will take the difficult decisions necessary to ensure there is trust and confidence in our national finances. That means decisions of eye-watering difficulty. But I give the House and the public this assurance: every single one of those decisions, whether reductions in spending or increases in tax, will be shaped through core, compassionate, conservative values that will prioritise the needs of the most vulnerable. That is why I pay tribute to my predecessors for the energy price guarantee, for the furlough scheme, and indeed for earlier decisions to protect the NHS budget in a period when other budgets were being cut. But, Mr. Speaker, I want to be completely frank about the scale of the economic challenge we face. We have had short-term difficulties. Caused by the lack of an OBR forecast alongside the mini-budget. But there are also inflationary and interest pressures around the world. Russia's unforgivable invasion of Ukraine has caused energy and food prices to spike. We cannot control what is happening in the rest of the world, but when the interest of economic stability means the government needs to change course, we will do so. And that is what I have come to the House to announce today. In my first few days in the job, I've held extensive discussions with the Prime Minister, Cabinet colleagues, the Governor of the Bank of England, the OBR, the Head of the Debt Management Office, Treasury officials and many others. The conclusion I've drawn from those conversations is that we need to do more quickly to give certainty to the markets about our fiscal plans and show through action and not just words that the United Kingdom can and always will pay our way in the world. We've therefore decided to make further changes to the mini-budget immediately, rather than waiting until the medium-term fiscal plan in 2 weeks' time, in order to reduce unhelpful speculation about those plans. Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful for your agreement on the need to give the markets an early brief summary this morning, but I welcome the opportunity to give this House details of those decisions now. We've decided on the following changes to support confidence and stability. Firstly, the Prime Minister and I agreed yesterday to reverse almost all the tax measures announced in the growth plan 3 weeks ago that have not been legislated for in Parliament. So we will continue with the abolition of the health and social care levy, changes to stamp duty, the increase in the annual investment allowance to £1 million and the wider reforms to investment taxes. But we will no longer be proceeding with the cuts to dividend tax rates, saving around £1 billion a year, the reversal of the off-payroll working reforms introduced in 2017 and 2021, saving around £2 billion a year, the new VAT-free shopping scheme for non-UK visitors, saving a further £2 billion a year, or the freeze on alcohol duty rates, saving around £600 million a year. I will provide further details on how those rates will be uprated.
Just let's just sort this telephone out. I've just switched it off, all right? It's off. OK. Sorry, Chancellor. Carry on. It was this.
I will provide further details on how alcohol duty rates will be uprated shortly. Second, the Government is currently committed to cutting the basic rate of income tax to 19% in April of 2023. It is a deeply held Conservative value, a value that I share, that people should keep more of the money they earn, which is why we have continued with the abolition of the health and social care levy. But at a time when markets are asking serious questions about our commitment to sound public finances, we cannot afford a permanent, discretionary increase in borrowing worth £6 billion a year. So I've decided that the basic rate of income tax will remain at 20%, and it will do so indefinitely until economic circumstances allow for it to be cut. Taken together with the decision not to cut corporation tax and restoring the top rate of income tax, the measures I've announced today will raise around £32 billion every year. The third step I'm taking today, Mr. Speaker, is to review the energy price guarantee. That was the biggest single expense in the growth plan and one of the most generous schemes in the world. It's a landmark policy for which I pay tribute to my predecessor, my right honourable friend from Spelthorne, and will support millions of people through a difficult winter, reducing inflation by up to 5%. So I confirm today that the support we are providing between now and April next year will not change. But beyond next April, the Prime Minister and I have reluctantly agreed it would not be responsible to continue exposing the public finances to unlimited volatility in international gas prices. So I'm announcing today a Treasury-led review into how we support energy bills beyond April next year. The review's objective is to design a new approach that will cost the taxpayer significantly less than planned, whilst ensuring enough support for those in need. Any support for businesses will be targeted to those most affected, and a new approach will better incentivise energy efficiency. There remain, I'm afraid, many difficult decisions to be announced in the medium-term fiscal plan on October the 31st. When I confirm that we will publish a credible, transparent, fully costed plan to get debt falling as a share of the economy over the medium term, based on the judgment and economic forecasts of the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility. I'd like to thank the OBR, whose Director Richard Hughes I met this morning, and the Bank of England, whose Governor Andrew Bailey I've now met twice. I fully support the vital independent roles both institutions play, which give markets, the public and the world confidence that our economic plans are credible and rightly hold us to account for delivering them. But I also want more independent expert advice as I start my journey as Chancellor. So I'm announcing today the formation of a new Economic Advisory Council to do just that. This council will advise the government on economic policy, with 4 names announced today: Rupert Harrison, former Chief of Staff to the Chancellor of the Exchequer; Gert-Jan Vlieger from Element Capital; Sushil Wadhwani of Wadhwani Asset Management; and Karen Ward of JP Morgan. Mr. Speaker, we remain completely committed to our mission to go for growth, but growth requires confidence and stability, which is why we are taking many difficult decisions starting today. But whilst we do need realism about the challenges ahead, we must never fall into the trap of pessimism. Despite all the adversity and challenge we face, there is enormous potential in this country, with some of the most talented people, 3 of the world's top 10 universities, the most tech unicorns in Europe, one of the world's great financial centres, incredible strengths in the creative industries, in science, research, engineering, manufacturing and innovation. And all that gives me genuine optimism about our long-term prospects for growth. But to achieve that, it is vital we act now to create the stability on which future generations can build. The reason the United Kingdom has always succeeded is because at big and difficult moments we have taken tough decisions in the long-term interests of the country, and in a way that is consistent with compassionate Conservative values. That is what we will do now, and I commend this statement to the House.
I now call the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As I regularly say now, I welcome the new Chancellor to his place. The fourth in 4 months of chaos and fiasco as this Conservative government spirals down the political plug hole. But the damage has been done. This is a Tory crisis made in Downing Street, but ordinary working people are paying the price. All that is left after these humiliating U-turns are higher mortgages for working people and higher bonuses for bankers. And their climb down on energy support begs the question yet again, why won't they extend the windfall tax on energy producers to help foot the bill? Now, it is good to finally see the Prime Minister in her place, and not, as the Leader of the House had to assure us earlier, under a desk. But, Mr Speaker, what is she left with? No authority, no credibility, no plan for growth, and it is clear to see the people who caused the chaos cannot be the people to fix the chaos. They are out of ideas, out of touch and out of time. Now, the Prime Minister should have spoke to the House today. But we know that she cannot do that with a shred of credibility, given that the survival of this government now depends on smashing to smithereens everything that she stands for. And now she is attempting to reverse everything that she campaigned on. It is not just impossible, it is absurd. The Prime Minister is barely in office and she is certainly not in power.
Very true.
Only 5 days ago, the Prime Minister said at Prime Minister's Questions that there would be, and I quote, absolutely no public spending reductions. But after what we have heard from the Chancellor today, every single public service is again at risk from the Conservatives, from our NHS nurses to our schools to our servicemen and women, with the country paying the price for their incompetence. The Prime Minister said that she had an energy package for 2 years. Now that's being withdrawn on the very day it is supposed to be legislated for. The Prime Minister insisted that her Conservative mini-budget would lead the country to the promised land. Instead, it has led to the highest mortgages in 15 years and emergency interventions by the Bank of England to protect pensions. And then on Friday, the unedifying spectacle of the Chancellor being dragged back from the IMF before he could do any more damage to our economy. So she has turned to a new Chancellor, who finished 8th out of 8 in the Tory leadership contest, winning just 18 votes from MPs. The Tories have run out of credibility and now they are running out of chancellors. The latest office holder has been in the Cabinet for 9 of the last 12 years, at the centre of a government responsible for low growth and weakened public services, and him responsible for helping run the NHS into the ground. He was a big part of austerity season 1, and now he says the cure is austerity season 2. And what, Mr Speaker, was the Chancellor's flagship policy in his own short-lived leadership contest? To reduce corporation tax in a totally unfunded manner, not from 25% to 19%. The right honourable gentleman called for it to be lowered to 15%, with not a single explanation of how it was to be paid for. The truth is, had he won the contest and implemented these policies, we would be in an even worse place than we are now. There is no mandate, there is no authority for any of this. The Conservatives have put a lasting premium on people's mortgages. Uncosted borrowing has sent interest rates spiralling. Millions of people's mortgage deals will be coming to an end in the next few months, leaving many families forking out £500 or more a month. People will be paying a Tory mortgage premium for years to come. So how does the Chancellor think ordinary people can possibly afford any more of this Conservative government? We've heard no answers today. Now, the Chancellor has said that growth requires confidence and stability. I agree. But where does he think the lack of confidence and the lack of stability has come from? It didn't come from the sky, Mr Speaker. It came from the mini-budget 3 weeks ago. And what does it say about our country? That we are watching borrowing costs hour by hour. That's not the sign of a strong G7 economy. It is the exact opposite. Businesses are now saying that things are so unstable that they are pausing investment here in Britain. The former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Charles Bean, has outlined the extraordinary damage that the Conservatives have done to our standing. In his words, we've moved from looking not too dissimilar from the US or Germany to looking more like Italy and Greece. Yeah. What a mess. And where is the Office for Budget Responsibility forecast? Has this government learnt nothing? Does the Chancellor really expect the country to take everything from him at face value? Last week, the Business Secretary was busy undermining the Office for Budget Responsibility. Today we have received another massive fiscal statement with no forecast. What has this government got to hide? They should publish the numbers so that we know the true state of the public finances after 40 days of this Prime Minister and after 12 years of Conservative government. Now, today the Chancellor has scaled back help with energy bills for families and pensioners. It begs the question, yet again, why won't they bring in a proper windfall tax on energy producers to help foot the bill for consumers? And when will the current Chancellor publish in full the government's estimates of windfall profits of the energy giants over the next 2 years? Now, no one was talking about spending cuts until the Tories crashed the economy with their mini-budget. So I ask the Chancellor, why should the British people pay the economic price for the Tories' mistakes, and what spending cuts does the government plan to make? We believe that the government must honour its commitments to uprate benefits and pensions in line with inflation. Will the Chancellor make it clear today that that is what he intends to do? And what a contrast, that cuts to benefits are still on the table, but the one thing the Chancellor couldn't bring himself to reverse today was lifting the cap on bankers' bonuses. Why is this the last policy standing in this disastrous mini-budget? And let me come to credibility. Does the Chancellor accept that once credibility and trust have been destroyed, it cannot be simply regained by a series of zigzagging, chaotic U-turns? Will he and the Prime Minister apologise for the costs and anxieties laid on families? Can he admit once and for all that the market turmoil we are in was directly caused by the disastrous decisions of his predecessor and of the Prime Minister? Can he guarantee that the Bank of England won't have to intervene again to save the government? And what guarantee can he give to people about their pensions, about their mortgages and their household bills? The Chancellor said today that everything is now on the table. But is that really the case? We know that abolishing the non-dom tax status will raise £3 billion a year, yet there was no mention of that today. How can it be right that some of the richest individuals in society are allowed to buy their way out of paying tax that should be paid here in Britain? This would not be an eye-wateringly difficult decision, Mr. Speaker, so why doesn't the government just do it? There is lasting damage, which these policy U-turns won't change. They've set fire to everything. Now they insist it is all fine. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, an arsonist is still an arsonist, even if he runs back into a burning building with a bucket of water. Because they can't be trusted. The Tories are clinging on for themselves regardless of the cost to the country. Trickle-down economics will always fail. What drives forward our economy are the talents and efforts of millions of working people and thousands of ordinary businesses. The government's economic credibility has been destroyed. They have harmed our economic institutions. People are paying higher mortgages. The same set of people doing U-turns isn't going to fix it. The only way to change this is a real change in government.
I thank the honourable lady for her questions, and I'm sorry that, given the speed at which things moved at the weekend, I haven't had time to sit down with her one-to-one, as would normally be the practice before parliamentary exchanges. Now, I understand the role opposition parties play. I've stood at that dispatch box myself. But behind the rhetoric, and I was listening very carefully, I don't think she disagreed with a single one of the decisions that I announced to Parliament. And that is important for the country and markets to know. And I think there is also agreement on the process of policy making. I support the independence of the Bank of England, introduced by Gordon Brown, and I know she supports the independence of the OBR set up by George Osborne. The whole government supports the independence of those two important institutions. Now, I fully accept And I don't think I could have been more clear that we have had to change some decisions made in the last few weeks. But what I reject wholeheartedly is her broader narrative about Conservative economic management. Let me remind her that the UK's unemployment rate is the lowest since 1974. That's below France, Italy, Canada, Belgium, Sweden, Spain and the Netherlands, and massively lower than 2010. Let me remind her that since 2010, our growth rate has been the third highest in the G7. She may not want to hear this, but these are the economic facts. Our growth rate since this party came into power has been higher than Germany, France, Italy and Japan, and faster than any G7 country this year. Looking to the future, we have the largest technology sector in Europe, more foreign direct investment than anywhere in Europe bar one country. That is a legacy to be proud of. Now, I was listening carefully for some questions about the measures that I announced, but she didn't ask any, and I think she agreed with them. But I will pick her up on one point. She talked about the NHS. Let me tell her, maybe they don't want to listen about the NHS. She talked about the NHS. Because of the global financial crisis which happened on her party's watch, the NHS went through one of its most difficult periods ever, and this party protected the NHS budget. Then in 2017, we were able to give it its biggest single increase in funding because of the difficult decisions that we took and that party opposed. So, Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, we inherited the financial crisis, we dealt with a global pandemic, we've led the world in support of Ukraine, possible because of difficult decisions taken over the last 12 years, each and every one opposed by the party opposite. So if she is preaching today the need for fiscal credibility, which I warmly welcome, can I just tell her this? The true test will be in 2 weeks' time to see whether she supports public spending restraint. I've shown Conservatives can raise taxes. Will she show Labour are willing to restrain spending?
Chair of the Select Committee, Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's statement. It was both frank and bold, and it appears, in the very short term at least, to have steadied the markets. One point that my right honourable friend raised at the dispatch box, though was absent from his statement earlier today, was his renewed commitment to our financial institutions, particularly the Bank of England and the Office for Budget Responsibility. He has also now brought forward the Economic Advisory Council, a number of members of which have appeared before the Treasury Select Committee, and I think he has chosen well. But could he reassure the House that in no way the Economic Advisory Council will in any way conflict with the Bank of England or the Office of Budget Responsibility, the FCA, the PRA and all of our institutions, and that it will be there to complement, not work against any of those institutions?
Well, can I thank the honourable gentleman who has spoken very wisely in recent weeks about the difficult issues that we face. I can absolutely give him that assurance. I want, to be frank, to make sure that I'm getting advice from fantastic institutions like the Treasury, the Bank of England and the Office for Budget Responsibility, but also advice that is independent of those institutions, because that is the way we'll get the best result. Rupert Harrison in particular has enormous experience of running the Treasury under George Osborne over many years. I think he'll make a very important contribution, as will his colleagues on the Council. And with respect to the markets, he's absolutely right to be cautious about what happens. They go up as well as they go down, and no government can control or should seek to control the markets. What we can do is the things within our power, and that is a commitment, a very firm and clear commitment to fiscal responsibility.
Now come to SNP spokesperson Alison Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I see that the Prime Minister has been urgently running off to something else rather than staying to listen. Mr. Speaker, when the previous Chancellor came to give his mini-budget 3 long weeks ago, I called it economic chaos. What an understatement that turned out to be. I'm not sure words have yet been invented to describe the scale of the unmitigated disaster which the Prime Minister and her Chancellors have created in the past 24 days. We're back where we started, significantly worse off due to Tory incompetence. And isn't it just as well that in Scotland, the Scottish Government didn't take the advice of Tory MPs to copy and paste before the front bench here deletes all? And people will be paying the price for this for many years to come through higher interest and borrowing rates. Will he apologise for this increased cost that his colleagues have inflicted upon people? And he has not been clear at all. Will he confirm the status of the banker's bonus cap? Has it been scrapped or has it not been scrapped? There is little by way of detail from the current Chancellor on doubling down on austerity and what that will mean for people. But the Institute for Government and SIPFA have been clear that there is no fat left to cut after a lost decade for public services under the Tories. So where does the current Chancellor expect to make these cuts, these efficiency savings? We know what he means when he says it. We already know the terrible price of austerity because Glasgow Centre for Population Health have attributed 330,000 excess deaths to Tory austerity policies, an unacceptable human cost. Again and again, the Tories bring forward harmful policies they never feel the consequences of. And we know that guarantees mean nothing under the Tories either. The so-called energy price guarantee turns out to be worth 6 months, not 2 years, a cliff edge looming next April. National Energy Action have said that many vulnerable people were holding on by their fingertips. Government must be very, very careful it doesn't prize them away. So can he tell us exactly what will happen for households in April? The scale of increases make almost everybody vulnerable, except perhaps his banker pals. And what will happen to the most vulnerable when inflation soars as a result of the return of spiralling energy costs? The previous Chancellor never got around to telling me what will happen to business energy costs at the end of their 6-month reprieve. So can the current Chancellor tell me what support businesses signing impossibly expensive contracts as we speak can expect? And will this current Chancellor, as the former Chancellor did, commit to uprating benefits with the rate of inflation? And we also increase support to those languishing in the asylum system and end the punishing no recourse to public funds regime? Will he cancel the benefit cap and scrap the 2-child limit, which is trapping so many children in poverty? Where is his compassion for them? Will he invest in renewables, carbon capture and storage, and a comprehensive energy efficiency and insulation package? And finally, Mr. Speaker, does he understand, does he really understand, when looking at broken Britain, the chaos that the Tories have wreaked and the prospect of a bleak Brexit future under both Labour and the Tories, that more and more of Scotland's people are looking at the comprehensive independence prospectus set out by the First Minister today and moving towards the vision of a fairer, greener, more prosperous Scotland back in the heart of Europe where we belong?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to exchange comments with the Honourable Lady. I will look forward to working with her closely in the months ahead. I would remind her that this Conservative government is spending £37 billion this year to support people across the United Kingdom with cost of living concerns. That is possible because of difficult economic decisions that the SNP have opposed at nearly every stage, and that includes large support for businesses up and down the country. But the main thing I would say to her, very gently, is that she cannot claim to be concerned about the economic turmoil of the last few weeks, when the central policy of the SNP, independence, would leave turmoil for Scotland, not for a few weeks, but for many, many years to come. A new currency, somehow finding a way to trade with the UK internal market, but also the European single market, border checks between England and Scotland, as announced today by the First Minister, a massive gap in public finances that would have to be breached. That is a recipe for precisely the austerity she says she's worried about. Let me say this. If we want economic stability, if Scotland wants economic stability, to coin a phrase, we are stronger together.
Sir John Redmond.
What will the impact of these measures be on the growth rate, and will we still avoid recession?
I will publish the economic forecasts from the OBR when I make my statement in a fortnight's time, and I think it's better for me to wait until I hear that. But the proper answer to his question is that what we are seeking is long-term sustainable increase in the economic growth rate, and that is a central policy of the Prime Minister, which has my wholehearted support.
Margaret Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the country is feeling a sense of relief that trickle-down economics has been so quickly abandoned. But there was one element in the mini-budget which the new Chancellor did not address, and that was the issue of investment zones. That is we have great evidence all over the place about how that, as a mechanism for encouraging growth and jobs and prosperity, has failed from the Thatcher years onward. All that happens is they're incredibly expensive. We lose income from them. They only lead to the transfer of jobs from one poor area to the other, and they are a massive opportunity for every kleptocrat, oligarch and criminal to launder money into the UK. Will the Chancellor abandon that policy too?
Well, I would like to say that I have a great deal of respect for the campaigning the Right Honourable Lady has done over many years against people illicitly hiding wealth and not paying their share of tax. And I do totally support the benefits that investment zones can bring, but we will implement that policy in a way that learns the lessons of when models that are similar have been tried in the past, and we will make sure that they are successful.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I welcome the return of an ironclad fiscal responsibility, albeit within the most velvet of gloves. For there can be no growth without economic credibility. But will he answer this question? When he brings forward the forecasts in a fortnight, made independently by the Office for Budget Responsibility, will he guarantee now that they will show debt falling as a proportion of our income, and show that once we have the finances fully under control, we will not be borrowing for day-to-day spending, because you cannot put the nation's spending on the never-never?
Yes and yes.
Ed Davey.
People are already suffering from the damage caused by this government's economic mistakes. Hundreds of pounds now added to mortgage bills, pushing millions of families to the brink, on top of higher food prices, higher fuel costs and higher energy bills. But despite that, the Chancellor refuses to undo one of the government's biggest injustices: its failure to impose a proper windfall tax on the record profits of the oil and gas companies, earned only because Putin is killing innocent Ukrainians. After so many U-turns, surely the Chancellor can persuade the Prime Minister to do one more. Will he introduce a proper windfall tax and help struggling families?
Let me tell the Right Honourable Gentleman, I am not against the principle of taxing profits that are genuine windfalls, but as he will know very well, in the energy industry, it is a very cyclical industry, and there are businesses that have periods of feast and famine, and you have to be very careful that you don't tax companies in a way that drives away investment. So we have said that nothing is off the table.
Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to congratulate my right honourable friend on his statement today, which is both wise and necessary. And there will be great relief across the House that the markets have responded positively to my right honourable friend's statement, not least thanks to his economic leadership and political skill. In the run-up to the 31st of October, will he reassure us and the markets that the Treasury and the OBR and the Independent Bank of England will be working closely together and in total lockstep?
I absolutely want to give him that reassurance, and I also want to thank him as someone who has enormous experience as to how the city works for the advice that he gave me over the weekend. I think one of the best things about the economic structures we have is the interaction between institutions which have independence and are able to give independent advice and Treasury and the government, and it has helped create stability, and I hope that what I've said today will bolster that further.
Bashunara Ali.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I congratulate the Chancellor on his appointment, and I hope he lasts longer than his predecessors. Well, no. 5 million people will see their mortgages go up. And the mini-budget fiasco means that on average £500 more in payment, and in London nearly 900. Can the Chancellor assure us that he's going to look at how he can take that additional Prime Minister's mortgage premium off people's bills and take action to protect them in these difficult times? And if he can't, should they send the bill to him?
Well, let me say to the Honourable Lady that we have an absolute responsibility as a government to do everything we can to hold increases in mortgage rates down as much as is possible insofar as the government has an influence on them through its own actions. And that is why I've taken, I think, very strong and quick steps to demonstrate this government's commitment to fiscal balance. But we are in a world in which, unfortunately, interest rates are going up everywhere, and everyone is having to deal with increases in mortgage rates, and we are thinking about the challenge for people who have those mortgages, but I want to make sure that that does not happen as a result of actions by this government.
Kevin Hollingray.
Can I welcome all the measures in his statement today? I think it's absolutely right that we look for better value for the taxpayer through spending restraints. But can he confirm any cuts to spending will not impact on capital expenditure, infrastructure expenditure, particularly across the north, and that will fully deliver on projects that we've already committed to, such as Northern Powerhouse Rail?
As my honourable friend will know, sorry, my voice is a bit croaky at the moment because I've been probably talking too much over the last few days. But as my honourable friend will know, there are very important projects that we all care about a great deal. But given the severity of the situation at the moment, we are not taking anything off the table, whether tax increases or spending reductions. But I don't believe it is possible. I don't believe it is possible to have a long-term, credible economic growth strategy that doesn't recognise the vital importance of capital spending.
Siobhan MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even a screeching U-turn can't repair the damage when we've already had the crash. But when the Chancellor dismantled Trussonomics overnight, why on earth did he decide to carry on boosting bankers' bonuses in the heart of a cost-of-living crisis?
Because the policy didn't work, and we will get more tax from rich bankers with the policy we now have.
Greg Clark.
Mr. Speaker, I welcome the Chancellor's statement. If there are further steps that are required, will he do whatever it takes to restore the UK's fiscal credibility?
I will.
Samuel Wilson.
First of all, can I welcome the appointment of the Chancellor and wish him well in his job, because his success on his success depends the success of all of our constituents in meeting the cost of living. Whilst inflation cannot be blamed on the government because it's an international, and whilst interest rates are going up across the world, the one thing which the Chancellor is fully responsible for is today's increase in taxation, which will take money from people at a vital time, enabling them to pay, not able to pay their bills or their investment plans. I assume he has done some economic modelling in this. What impact does he believe it will have on growth and on the burden of debt in relation to GDP over the next 2 years?
Well, he asked a very important question, and I want to remind him that what I have announced to date has been very largely the cancellation of planned tax cuts rather than actual new tax increases. And this has a very important impact in a positive direction on national finances, but unfortunately it won't be the end of the story. If we're going to deliver a credible budget in which we can demonstrate, as my right honourable friend asked earlier, that debt is falling as a percentage of GDP by the end of the period, then we're going to have further difficult decisions ahead, and this government won't shirk from them.
Helen Waitley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
A pandemic followed by a war. Our constituents do not expect this time to be easy, but they do expect us to set out the difficult choices, to make the difficult choices, and then set out the path for a better future. Can I ask my right honourable friend, particularly in considering his experiences of many years, to continue to press ahead with our commitment to reform social care, knowing as he does that social care and the NHS go hand in hand, and again how important they are to our constituents?
Well, she and I have had very many discussions on social care over the years, mainly when I've been a backbencher and she's been a minister. And it is a sector that is in great difficulty at the moment. I'm very aware of those concerns. I'm also very aware of the pressures in the NHS at the moment. I'm not making any commitments as to what exactly we will do, but as I said earlier, all these decisions will be taken through the prism of what matters most to the people who need the help the most.
Dame Angela Edel.
Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor has put a brutal end to the self-proclaimed new era of Trussonomics with his announcements, and he's taken away £32 billion worth of planned tax cuts. According to the Institute for Fiscal Studies, that still leaves a £30 billion hole in his sums, and if rumours are correct, it could be as high as £40 billion if the OBR calculations that I've heard about are correct. That means surely, doesn't it, Mr. Speaker, austerity 2.0 of at least the same size as the first level of austerity we had from 2010 to 2015. Surely, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor must know that public services simply cannot deal with that level of cuts when they've been so weakened by austerity, the first round of austerity.
Let me say to the right honourable lady, I was a cabinet minister in 2010 when we had very difficult decisions to take in the wake of the financial crisis, and my department's budget was cut by 24%. And I don't believe we are talking about anything of that scale, and I think it's likely that cash spending will continue to go up. But that said, I want to be completely frank with people. We are going to have very difficult decisions, both on tax and spending, in the next couple of weeks. We will try and take those decisions as compassionately as possible. So it's going to be tough going forward, but I don't expect it to be on the scale that she suggests.
Sir Edward Lee.
I congratulate the Chancellor on his soothing and competent tone, and of course we've got to calm the markets. But what is our vision? Of course we accept the shortcomings. Of course we accept the shortcomings of the mini-budget. But does he accept we can't just slide into a sort of second-rate economy and go in the direction of France with a bloated public sector, the higher taxes for 70 years, gross inefficiencies? So by the time of the next election, can we as a Conservative Party promise to get taxation back, at least the level it was when we started the start of this Parliament, and get corporation back to one of the most competitive in Europe? Otherwise, what is the point of the Conservative Party?
Here's the problem, Mr. Speaker, with all the noises we're getting from the party opposite. This compassionate Conservative government was able to step in with massive help from members of the public with the furlough scheme, with the energy price guarantee, because we took difficult decisions on the economy in the years that preceded it, each and every one that was opposed by the party opposite. I say to my right honourable friend that the point of a Conservative government is to build a strong economy. That's what we will do. It's the job. It's an important point I wish to make, Mr. Speaker. It is the job of the Chancellor not just to balance the books, but also to have a vision for economic growth. And I hope I will persuade him in 2 weeks' time that I have just that.
Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Chancellor agree with the Prime Minister, who confirmed that the state pension would rise with inflation in April? And if he does agree, can he commit to it today?
Well, I'm very aware of how many vulnerable pensioners there are and the importance of the triple lock. But as I said earlier, I'm not making any commitments on any individual policy areas, but every decision we take will be taken through the prism of what matters most to the most vulnerable.
Mark Harper.
Mr. Speaker, can I thank the Chancellor for his robust defence of Conservative economic policy over the last 12 years. More of that, please. And my inner chartered accountant can't but help welcome the fact that he's reassured me that it is the Treasury's job, essential task, to make sure the sums add up. Yeah. Can I ask him a little bit about the review of the energy price guarantee? It's right, I think, to focus taxpayer support on those that need it most, but can I draw to his attention that 1/7 of the population are not on the gas grid. 40% of my constituents are not. As he designs that system to protect the most vulnerable, can he make sure it works for everyone in the country, wherever they live and however they heat their homes?
Well, I look forward to lots of useful advice from his inner accountant over the months and years ahead. I will certainly bear that point in mind. The issue with the revised scheme that we want to announce for the energy price guarantee is that I think most people agree with the logic of targeting support where it's needed the most, but we need a scheme that works practically, and it's not actually particularly easy to design that kind of scheme. So we're going to do as much work as we can, and we'll announce what we're going to do as soon as we can, but we'll certainly bear in mind the points he made.
John MacDonald.
The backdrop to today's statement isn't just the chaos of the last fortnight. It is also a report of 3 weeks ago that demonstrated, as a result of austerity, there has been over 300,000 excess deaths. Can I ask him in his preparations for the 31st of October that he recognises that unless he increases benefits by at least the rate of inflation, there will be more excess deaths and suffering?
He will know, because I've said it many times today, that I'm not making firm commitments on any individual elements of tax and spending, but I hope he is reassured that I've been very clear about the values through which we will take those decisions.
Mr. Early.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I congratulate my right honourable friend. He has hit the ground running in this job. These are difficult decisions. They're the correct decisions right now. We all aspire to tax cuts in the future, but he's right that we actually have to have the money to pay for those. But could I ask him, as he prepares for the 31st of October, to look in detail at how we address what is the most, in my view, deep-rooted problem this country faces and has done for decades, which is our current account deficit. We will not truly get rid of these issues until we restore a better balance in our national finances. Can I ask him to make that a priority?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his question, and I agree. Ultimately, it is not sustainable to have a permanent current account deficit, and that is something we need to address.
Bentley.
The Chancellor announced that he will be reviewing the energy price guarantee. But does the government have any plans to review the level of support offered to off-grid properties with the cost of the heating bills this winter? There is cross-party consensus that the £100 payment is inadequate to meet the rising level of bills. So will he bring forward further support in advance of this winter?
Well, I've listened carefully to what the honourable gentleman said, as I did to my honourable friend from Forest of Dean, and we will certainly look carefully at what can be done for off-grid properties.
Tobias Selwood.
Mr. Speaker, can I welcome the necessary but vigorous course corrections that my right honourable friend has introduced? He began his statement by saying that the central responsibilities of any government, they also include security, defence of Britain, support to our allies, and standing up to our adversaries, as we've done so in Ukraine. My right honourable friend knows the world's getting more dangerous, not less. Will he commit to continuing that promise of 3% GDP defence spend?
Well, it won't be a secret to my right honourable friend that I'm sympathetic to that, because I've campaigned for it when I was a backbencher very loudly and visibly. But all of these things have to be sustainable. Any increase in defence spending has to be an increase that we can sustain over very many years. Let me just say to him today that I agree with him entirely that the duty of a government is security for the population in all senses of the word.
Steve McKay.
Thank you. Does the Chancellor's compassionate conservatism
extend to raising the minimum income component of pension credit, or is he prepared to let the poorest pensioners in the land be sacrificed on the altar of Trussonomics?
What I gently say to him is that whilst I completely understand how important it is to support our most vulnerable pensioners, what they need more than anything is a strong economy that can pay for the support that we would want to give them.
Simon Hall.
Can I welcome my right honourable friend to his place and breathe a sigh of relief at the grown-up and sensible approach which he's taken to the issues at hand. Can I also echo the remarks of my right honourable friend for the Forest of Dean and the honourable member for Ceredigion of the need for my right honourable friend to take into account those who are off-grid and using heating oil. They deserve as much support as we possibly can. My right honourable friend is newly empowered and he is able to slay many dragons. Could he slay the dragon of fracking, which was not in our manifesto?
Well, this is an issue that's risen its head in my own constituency. Let me simply say to him, the government's position is very clear. We will not proceed unless there is local support.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the bonfire of government policy that's just taken place, the Chancellor wasn't very specific about what would happen to the Prime Minister's investment zone policy. Personally, I was hoping that it would be incinerated as well, not least because it is designed to undermine environmental regulation, to avoid fair taxation and bypass local democracy. Now, in the past, he has said that he is a green Tory. I have to put it to him that that is sadly an endangered species right now. But if he's serious about being a green Tory, will he now take steps to demonstrate it by ruling out any policies that will undermine nature, protection and restoration? And will he accept that there is no financial capital that is not entirely dependent on a thriving natural capital?
I am absolutely committed to protecting our green spaces and boosting biodiversity. But I also think it's important to look at environmental regulations to see if they can be streamlined in a way that is consistent with allowing the natural world to flourish as well as the economy.
George Freeman.
Can I welcome and thank the Chancellor for bringing so quickly a calm reassurance to the markets and to this crisis. Would you agree with me that economic crises based on political confidence mean everybody in this chamber, both sides of the House, have a duty to reassure the markets that we're capable of taking tough decisions? And would he second agree with me that as we look to grow, as he's highlighted, the technology and science areas provide huge opportunity and we should resist the opportunity to cut funding?
There is no more formidable advocate of science and technology than my right honourable friend. And I think he knows that I also care very much about that sector. And with respect to reassuring the markets, I think the most important thing is, as we said earlier, that there is actually no disagreement about the policies announced today. And I think it's important for the markets to know there is that consensus in the House.
Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, the Prime Minister told the BBC in Hull that we would be included in the Northern Powerhouse rail, despite not being included in the government's integrated rail plan. So I want to know, was the Prime Minister wrong to say that to the BBC in Hull?
I don't know, but I'll write and tell her.
Dr. Julia Lewis.
Mr. Speaker, may I warmly welcome the Chancellor's earlier remarks about defence and security. As it took us very many years to pay off this country's colossal Second World War debt, am I right in thinking that the huge costs of COVID and of Putin's aggression in Ukraine cannot possibly be cleared completely in the short to medium term?
Well, I wish I could answer that question, but as he will know better than me, this appalling saga is far from over, so we don't know what the total costs are going to be. I thank him for his very rapid, not entirely unexpected lobbying on defence budget issues since I took up this post. And what I would say to him is that I think the job of the Chancellor of the Exchequer is to make sure that our economy is strong enough to fund the role that Britain wants to play in the defence of democracy and freedom all over the world.
Speaker, I have worked with and against the Chancellor of the Exchequer on many occasions, and I've learned he's an honest man. But can I tell him today that he just said in his remarks that this country is always good at rising to the challenge of big and difficult times. Can I tell him what I hate about what he said today, really do hate about it, is there was no note of contrition. This big and bad was started by his lot only 2 weeks ago. Yeah. And it's not just big and bad, it's a national disaster that he did not give one word of contrition about the mess he's made his party's made of this country.
Well, all I would say to the honourable gentleman, for whom I do have the greatest respect, and we have many, many exchanges in this House over the years, is that I think actions speak louder than words. And I don't think I could have been plainer in going out this weekend and what I've said today in accepting that mistakes were made. But what the country wants to see is us correcting those mistakes, and that's what we've done.
Steve Bry.
My right honourable friend knows that I'm very pleased to see him in Downing Street, and the sense of relief expressed to me this weekend as I've been out and about in my constituency was palpable. I welcome his statement, I welcome its realism, its honesty, and his trademark sense of optimism in his final remark, which I certainly could learn from. He's right that growth demands confidence. So does he have confidence that when the bank make their decisions a week or so after his statement in 2 weeks' time, that a rise in interest rates, which is terrifying my constituents, the mere prospect of it, is not inevitable?
Well, I thank my right honourable friend for his generous comments. I just say this. It's not for the government to say what the Bank of England does when the Monetary Policy Committee makes its decision on interest rates. But of course, I've had conversations with the Governor to ask him what it is the bank needs to hear for them to feel that the inflationary pressures will be lower and they would not have to make as high an increase as perhaps some people are predicting. And thinking about the concerns of our constituents' mortgages is top of my mind.
Zora Sultana.
Speaker, the Chancellor has pledged a new wave of austerity with public spending cuts, squeezing services that have already been cut to the bone over the past 12 years. This is without a mandate, and like before, this round of austerity is a political choice, not an economic necessity. So instead of cutting our services, the government could raise taxes on the super rich. And if the Chancellor believes in his approach, why doesn't it put it to the people and call for a general election?
With the greatest of respect to the Honourable Lady, I did not pledge, as she said, I think, a new wave of austerity. What I would say to her, if she doesn't like austerity, look at the generosity of the furlough scheme, look at the generosity of what we're doing on the cost of living crisis, all taken because of difficult decisions that she's opposed every time.
Richard Drax.
Speaker, can I welcome my right honourable friend to his place? He talks about growing the economy and a strong economy, and I'd agree with that. Can I just remind the House, particularly on the opposition benches, that it is in the main the private sector that raises the money, that pays the tax for the public sector. And we cannot go on hammering the private sector if we want to seek the growth that we want. So can I ask my right honourable friend, as he takes his place, and I really do welcome him there, that he bears this in mind and reduces taxation as soon as he's able to?
The answer is yes, and to demonstrate that I understand what he's talking about when he talks about the private sector, I'm going to say some words that I've always dreamed of saying from behind this dispatch box, which is that I used to be an entrepreneur.
Stuart Halsey.
Speaker, when the Chancellor spoke about difficult questions to be faced in the future, I hope he's not going to fall into the old trap of trying to cut his way to growth. It can't work. It never works. But can I actually welcome what he did today, the screeching U-turn on the vast majority of the mini-budget from the Prime Minister and his predecessor. But given he's done that, and I do welcome it, can we have a guarantee from him today that so long as he has anything to do with it, there will never be a return to extremist, crank, experimental think tank economics?
I'm happy to offer that guarantee if he will agree to explicitly reject the extremist crank think tank economics of Scottish independence.
Robert Halford.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the direction of travel of my right honourable friend, and also the restatement of compassionate conservatism, which is at the heart of this political party. Could I just ask my right honourable friend that when the previous government had to rightly cut the Conservative government under Chancellor George Osborne had to cut the deficit and cut debt, they also helped the most needy with the cost of living, introducing the living wage and cutting taxes for lower earners, introducing a fuel duty freeze, but they also invested in skills and apprenticeships. And I know he's not going to give me an answer now, but could I ask him, will that be his guiding philosophy as he goes forward in his new role?
Well, I always listen to my honourable friend very carefully on these issues. Let me say to him this, that I don't think we will solve the growth paradox of this country, raising our long-term rate of economic growth to 2.5% from under 1%, unless we tackle the skills issue. It is absolutely central. I don't promise that I can give him an entire solution to that in 2 weeks' time, but it's something I'd very much like to talk to him more about.
On Cryer.
Mr. Speaker, government insiders are busy telling the press that the Bank of England is playing roulette, that's in quotes, with the British economy. Is that helpful or unhelpful?
Well, those comments have not been coming from the government since I have been a part of it. I can't talk about what happened before, but what I will say is that I am working extremely closely with the Bank of England, and we are both absolutely aligned on the need for stability.
James Cockledge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I congratulate my right honourable friend. Welcome to his post. This is one of the crucial points, that one of the weaknesses of the plan for growth is that fiscal and monetary policy were effectively contradicting one another, and that when we talk about working with the Bank of England, what that really means is fiscal and monetary policy working in lockstep so that we deal with inflation, which is actually the biggest economic challenge we face.
He's actually answered the previous question much better than I did. The answer is yes.
Stephen Furry.
Thank you. It is quite right that the Chancellor is seeking to reassure the markets, but would he take the opportunity today to also to reassure the millions of people who rely on benefits, both people who are in work and people who are out of work? The UK has some of the lowest benefits in Europe. People on benefits with no plan B, they have no savings, and they have huge anxiety at present given the current situation. So can he pledge the benefits will increase in line with existing government policy, in line with the CPI, and also will he reverse what the previous Chancellor said in his mini budget around the more punitive approach to be taken against those on benefits?
Well, what I would say to him is just very straightforward. It's because I want us to be able to support the poorest, the most vulnerable, the people in the greatest difficulties in society, that I think the most important thing I can do right now as Chancellor is what I can to create economic stability, and that's what I'm doing.
Alex Chalk.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I warmly welcome the Chancellor's swift and decisive action today, but also the tone and, above all, the candour of his remarks. Does the Chancellor agree with me that the best way to build, in the long term, a strong economy and a fair society for my constituents in Cheltenham, many of whom he met recently, is to repair the public finances in the short term? That's the Conservative way. That's what builds prosperity in the long term.
Absolutely, and only a couple of weeks ago I was sitting in a cafe in Cheltenham having a cold sandwich with him, and I also want to thank him for his incredible articulacy in lobbying for the needs of the people of Cheltenham.
Stephen Kinnock.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Chancellor think that it's morally justifiable to lift the cap on bankers' bonuses whilst refusing to confirm that he will link benefits to inflation? Is it morally justifiable?
I understand why he's asked the question, and I believe that wealthier people should pay more as we go through a difficult period. But I think the mechanism that we were doing that with the cap wasn't working, and we will get more money out of the pockets of those rich bankers by what we're going to do now.
Flick Drummond.
Madam Deputy Speaker, many of our more advanced manufacturing businesses are in the defence sector, and they welcome our commitment to a growing defence spending. They have no problem with paying more corporation tax as long as there are incentives to support their cutting-edge research and development. Will my right honourable friend commit to ensure that those incentives are available across all industries?
Well, I think that's a very important point. We've got an issue that we need our companies to invest more in R&D. We've got, I think, a fantastic opportunity to be the world's next Silicon Valley with all the potential of our great universities and incredible levels of innovation. But I absolutely think there's more we can do, and I'll bear in mind her comments.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since 2015, the value of the pound's dropped about 30% compared to the dollar. After this government's mini budget, the pound hit an all-time low against the dollar. Now, given oil and gas and other related energy products are trading in dollars, isn't it the case that we're absolutely tanking the pound against the dollar? This government's actually added other costs to the cost of energy in the UK.
Well, I'm delighted that someone from the SNP is worried about the value of the pound, and I think that shows it matters to all of us. And I would say to him, in all seriousness, governments cannot control the value of currency and should not seek to do so. But insofar as our actions affect the stability of our markets, including the currency markets, the one thing we can do is show that we're balancing the books.
David Morris.
I'd like to welcome the new Chancellor in his new position, my right honourable friend, my friend. And I would also, Madam Deputy Speaker, you wouldn't know this, but my right honourable friend should have been coming to Morecambe on Thursday, but of course last weekend has changed these things. However, I would extend the invitation to come to Morecambe to see how much money has been spent there, how it has been doing very well since 2010, and come and see the Eden Project North site and the stakeholders.
I'd be delighted to accept his invitation, and he might not want to tell me what he'd like as a christening present for his daughter, because I've now got £1 trillion at my disposal.
Tamanjit Singh Dasi.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the history of British democracy, have we ever had such a calamitous start for a Prime Minister? And now 4 Chancellors in 4 months. But it was a majority of Conservative MPs and members who inflicted upon our country the fantasy trickle-down economics when they naively decided to take a holiday from reality, which has left many of my Slough constituents struggling to pay their bills. So does the new Chancellor, given that he has effectively dumped the kamikaze mini-budget, does he agree that he and the Prime Minister no longer have a democratic mandate to continue in their positions, and that they should step aside and let the exasperated British people make their decision?
Order, just before the Chancellor answers that question and responds to the very neat speech that the honourable gentleman has just made, I must appeal to colleagues for quick questions. We've had all the speeches. We don't need to hear all the same thing all over again. Quick questions so that the Chancellor can give brief replies, because otherwise we'll never get on to the other business. Chancellor.
I don't think a general election would contribute to stability if people had to worry about the disastrous policies of a future Labour government.
You've just pursued them all.
Mike Wood.
Deputy Speaker, I know that the decisions the Chancellor has taken today he would not have taken easily, but he will recognise that the planned increases in alcohol duties will have a devastating impact on many small pubs, small brewers and hospitality businesses. Will he look at how the changes he is making to beer duty in particular can be structured to help rather than harm these small hospitality businesses, and perhaps bring forward the implementation of draft beer duty?
I do hear my honourable friend, and the hospitality industry is incredibly important for our economy. And I just say 2 things. First of all, as he knows, we are reviewing the whole structure of duties when it comes to alcohol, and as part of that process, we will be keeping the levels of duty under constant review.
Tim Farron.
Deputy Speaker, many U-turns, but one that he has not made that is massively relevant to Cumbria and other rural communities. The cut in stamp duty will help nearly nobody who can currently not afford a home to be able to afford one. What it will do is add fuel to the fire of a second home ownership and Airbnb disaster in areas like the Lakes and the Dales. Will he understand the damage that excessive second home ownership and Airbnb does to communities like mine and indeed other parts of the country? Will he think again and do something to support our communities and to stop the housing catastrophe?
I do entirely understand the concerns of second home owners, and the government has been looking at that policy in enormous detail over recent months. But I would gently say to him that it would be wrong to be dismissive of the concerns of young people desperately trying to get onto the housing ladder, and the help we are giving them with the stamp duty reforms will make a significant difference.
Alan Cairns.
Deputy Speaker, I pay tribute to the Chancellor for his statement and for the urgency in which he's taken them. The energy price guarantee was welcomed across the House, although that is probably the policy that created the greatest uncertainty in the financial markets. Does my right honourable friend agree, as he reviews the policy, that there will continually be challenges in this area so long as Putin maintains his aggressive conflict in the Ukraine?
Absolutely, and I'm very pleased that he made that point, because we should remember that Putin's game is to try and turn economic instability into political instability, and we must not play along with it.
Stephen Doughty.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The chaos in the bond markets impacting on pensions were as a result of decisions by his government, his party, his Prime Minister. Can he now tell us, are all pension funds secure? What is the value of the total losses? And what actions will he be taking to ensure that people can have confidence in their pensions? Why should they ever trust the Tories with their pensions again?
I'm afraid I don't accept his analysis of why those problems happened at all. But I don't deny that we have had some issues with pension funds. But I would just point him to the Governor of the Bank of England's statement today that says that we are well on our way to resolving them.
Jack Burton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. People and businesses across Stoke-on-Trent are incredibly thankful for the support with energy bills throughout the winter. So will my right honourable friend look at when he comes to review these policies in April to make sure that those who most need that support are protected most, and particularly those energy-intensive businesses like ceramics in Stoke-on-Trent?
Well, my honourable friend will be pleased to know that I've already had discussions, extensive discussions with my Treasury officials about the needs of energy-intensive industries, and we're very well aware of those issues.
Jess Phillips.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It seems quite baffling to me that everybody giving and I welcome him to his place, plaudits for all the work he's done and well done, when the thing that he is undoing was the Prime Minister's budget, as if the last 4 weeks haven't happened, and I feel a tiny bit gaslit by it, I have to say. So why is he spending £2 billion a year on unfunded stamp duty cuts when he said today he couldn't announce unfunded tax cuts? So how is he going to pay for that?
She'll find out in 2 weeks.
Andrew Jones.
Can I just say it's very good to see my right honourable friend in his place. Does he agree that as well as supporting families and businesses now with energy bills, the need for long-term energy resilience is as urgent as ever? Will that be one of his priorities?
It will, not just my responsibility, but that of the whole government, because I think good government is about fixing long-term issues as well as dealing with short-term crises, and that is definitely a very, very important long-term issue.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we live in a deeply divided country and a deeply divided society. There are more poor people than ever, there's more people accessing food banks than ever before, and there are more children growing up in absolute poverty and, as a result of that, not achieving their best in life. Twice he's refused to answer the question about whether he will raise benefits in line with inflation. For a third time, can he please assure those people who rely on benefits for their very existence that they will be increased at least in line with inflation to tackle the appalling poverty that so many people face?
Well, I respect the right honourable gentleman for pressing me on that issue, because I understand how important it is. And let me say to him The reason I'm not able to give him the answer he seeks is because I'm not giving that answer on any area of spending or any tax policy. The situation we face is extremely grave, and we have to look at these issues in the round. And we will come to the House with those decisions just as soon as they have been made and also independently audited by the Office for Budget Responsibility.
Laura Farris.
Speaker, I welcome the rapid grip my right honourable friend has exerted on the public finances. It's been reflected throughout the day by the rally in sterling and gilts. But can I seek clarification of his comments on investment relief? Will he maintain his commitment to seed enterprise investment schemes focused on science and technology? They are thriving sectors in my constituency, and as he alluded to, they are the engines of our future economic success.
Well, I ran a small technology business for 14 years, so it's very much where my heart is. And I think there's a massive opportunity for the UK to create something a bit like the City of London, something that can really pay an enormous amount of corporate tax for many, many years to come. So I just want to say to her now, although I can't give her the answer, I am determined to grip that opportunity.
Pete Wishart.
If the Chancellor would like to take this opportunity to concede that he is now the de facto Prime Minister and it's he that calls the shots in government in what must be the most bizarre and surreal coup in political history. But I'm wondering, in this new role, does he think that the current Prime Minister is a help or a hindrance to his economic objectives?
Look, I just say this. It is the most challenging form of leadership to accept that a decision you have made has to be changed. And the Prime Minister has done that, and she has done so willingly because she understands the importance of economic stability, and I respect her for it.
Ian Lee.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I welcome my right honourable friend to his place. Would my right honourable friend please give the constituents, my constituents of Blythe Valley, an assurance that this Conservative government will continue to support the most vulnerable in society with their energy bills in the months ahead?
I will absolutely give that assurance, and I will say to him his own background is in mental health, and he understands just how vulnerable people can get, and those concerns will be topmost of our mind.
Grant Davis.
Yes, will the Chancellor, before he goes on a spending cut spree of public services, look at the analysis in today's Financial Times that says for every £1 invested in the NHS, it generates £4 in growth? And will he also do what he can to protect poorly paid health workers who are facing much higher mortgage costs due to his government?
Well, until he got to the end bit, I was going to say that sounds like the question I should have been asking the previous Chancellor as Chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee. I'm very aware of how the NHS doesn't just cost us money, but can contribute to our growth. And I think there is an enormous opportunity for this country to become one of the life science giants in the world.
Robin Walker.
My right honourable friend, his place and his focus on both fiscal responsibility and compassionate conservatism. Further to his very welcome answer to my right honourable friend from Harlow, would he agree that that money invested in the skills and the education of the most disadvantaged is money well spent, which will benefit the fiscal growth and stability of our country in the future?
I absolutely do, and I think there are many economists like Paul Johnson who would say that if we really want to have the productivity, the levels of wealth and prosperity of places like Germany and Singapore, then the skills gap is the biggest gap we have. I think it's scandalous that for decades, governments of all sides of this House have not been able to deal with the fact that around 100,000 people leave school every year unable to read. And I think these are very important issues, but I want to be honest, this is not something I'm going to be able to address, or the government's going to be able to address in the next 2 weeks. But it is absolutely something we will have to come back to.
Chris Bryant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For all the hand-wringing and soft soap, I'm afraid I don't think this one's any better than the last Chancellor. Yeah. Well, he's been present at all the failures over the last 12 years. The failure to invest in the NHS, the failure to make sure that we had PPE in time for a pandemic, the failure to deal properly with the invasion of Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea.
In 2014,
and all of these
They were in
things,
charge.
he has been there at the scene of the crime. And the biggest problem is we will now have, as a result of 12 years of Tory economics, we will have the highest tax take in our history, and still the highest borrowing in our history, and probably the largest tax cuts in our history. Why is this the only country, the only major economy in the world that has not yet grown to the level that it was before the pandemic?
I actually have a lot of respect for the honourable gentleman as a great parliamentarian, but will he allow me to say that there isn't really a polite word to describe the nonsense that he's just said? We inherited the worst financial crisis since the Second World War from his party, and since then we are the third highest growing country in the G7. He talked about the NHS, which had a 20 billion increase in funding on my watch, 40,000 more doctors, nurses and other clinicians, and there's more to come if we take the difficult decisions to grow our economy that his party always opposes.
Holly Mumby-Croft.
Deputy Speaker, my honourable friend the Chancellor knows very well the importance of steel, both to my Scunthorpe constituency and to our country. Will he confirm that the energy support package for business remains unaltered, and that when the Treasury enters into the 3-month review, they will do so mindful of the strategic value of steel?
Yes and yes.
Toby Perkins.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Firstly, when the Chancellor gets to speak, can he withdraw the claim that Labour opposed the furlough? Because actually we didn't. We supported furlough. Yeah. But secondly, the Chancellor was of the view, the previous Chancellor was of the view that if you reduce corporation tax, more money came back in revenue, and indeed, in his own short-lived leadership contest, he seemed to be saying the same thing. He proposed even greater cuts to corporation tax. So can he now tell us, does he believe that an increase in corporation tax will raise more revenue, or what, as he previously said, less?
Let me just say this to the honourable gentleman. I didn't say that Labour opposed the furlough scheme. What I said is you like it when we spend money, but you oppose all the measures necessary for the economy to be able to afford them. And when it comes to corporation tax, I would love to reduce corporation tax. And in the long run, I think you do get more money. Well, I'm answering his question. You do get more money back, but it has to be on money that you actually have. It can't be on borrowed money. And that's why we have changed direction.
Anthony Mangnall.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm utterly delighted to see the right honourable gentleman in his place, and it was an honour to be on his campaign team at the very beginning. But can I just add one small point, which is last week I met with the hospitality and tourism sector. They see the possibility of 10,000 businesses going out of business. Can I ask whether or not he will meet with me and representatives from the hospitality and tourism sector to talk about what we can do to keep that sector open, because it is absolutely the powerhouse of the British economy?
Well, after his generous comments, the answer is absolutely yes.
Beth Winter.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Chancellor has today raised the prospect of further departmental savings. He actually means cuts. But from the TUC to the IFG and the Welsh Local Government Association, it's agreed that there's nothing left to cut. So when will the Chancellor listen to the Wealth Tax Commission and others urging the government to raise tax on wealth and non-earnings income rather than decimate public services that our constituents rely on?
We already, with Conservative support, ask wealthier people to pay far more tax than people on low means. But the kind of taxes that she is advocating would destroy the wealth of the overall economy. I mean, we have less money for the NHS and for people who need it the most.
John Stevenson.
I appreciate the Chancellor has some really difficult decisions on tax and spending, but if we are to grow the economy, we must maintain the capital expenditure that we have. Up and down the country, there are a number of projects that were allocated funding 3-4 years ago that are now out to tender that can be built in the next 12 to 18 months, but they may have a slight shortfall. Will the Chancellor be sensitive to those projects? Because if we are to grow the economy, it is these sort of capital projects that we need to start.
Well, look, I absolutely agree about the importance of capital to the long-term growth of the economy, and indeed not just those projects but many other projects. So yes, we'll be sensitive to it, but I'm afraid that doesn't mean that we won't have to take difficult decisions.
Brendan O'Hara.
No, it's not here.
Right, the honourable gentleman disappeared before my very eyes. Ronnie Cowan.
No, it's not here.
All right, they're falling like 9 pins. My goodness me, we'd better try something different. Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's been reported that by the Number 10 were briefing that the Chancellor's statement was due to unspecified global headwinds rather than the mini-budget. But the former Deputy Governor of the Bank of England, Charles Bean, disagreed and said that the Prime Minister's insistence that the UK's economic turmoil was a global phenomenon was disingenuous. So, to be clear, what does the Chancellor believe has happened here? Who does he agree with? Who does he think is responsible for the terrible financial thumping that my constituents are now being affected by?
I don't think I could have been clearer in my statement. I said that the turmoil we've had is as a result of international and domestic factors.
Jerome Mayhew.
Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor will be aware that his actions over the last few days has already lowered long-term expectations for interest rates. So can my right honourable friend set out for the House what impact he anticipates that will have on mortgage rates in my constituency of Broughton and across the country, as well as on the government's ability to fund future services?
Well, I absolutely salute him for thinking about the needs of families having to pay mortgages which have an enormous impact on their finances. But as I have learned in my short time in this job, Chancellors never comment on what mortgage rates or interest rates should be. But I absolutely want to make sure that insofar as the government can influence it, we make sure that they're held down as low as possible.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. I'll be a bit more generous, and can I genuinely welcome the re-emphasis on market stability, on sound economic finance, and ensuring that our country genuinely has an economic policy that isn't going to frighten the markets. The Chancellor says that he is reviewing all tax and spending ahead of the budget, and he wants to ensure that he takes communities with him. Can I just impress on him the very real damage that was done in lots of communities across this country that one might call the red wall seats, but not all of them voted for the Conservatives in 2019, through the cuts to local government, 60 pence in the pound. Local government cannot take that level of cut again. So can I ask him to at least consider ensuring that those communities are protected?
Well, I'm not making any commitments on individual areas of any tax or spend, but I absolutely do understand the pressures faced in local government, yes.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Chancellor to his place? Can I welcome what he said about economic stability and the stability he's brought, and also what he said about protecting the most vulnerable, which I know my constituents will welcome. When the people of Newcastle-under-Lyme voted for me and for this government in 2019, they wanted to deliver Brexit, deliver us from the Labour Party, but also deliver us levelling up. And despite the difficult economic circumstances, can the Chancellor reassure me that this government will continue to spread opportunity and growth and investment across this nation?
I'm absolutely delighted to give that assurance. I think that it's a fundamental part of the Conservative philosophy that economic opportunity should be evenly shared across the country, and we accept that it isn't at the moment.
Alistair Carmichael.
The Chief Executive of the Scotch Whisky Association made the point this morning that time after time Freeze's in spirits duty has delivered more revenue to the Treasury, contrary to all the forecasts from the Treasury. The Chancellor will know that that is correct. So why does he think it would be different this time?
Well, I will happily take that piece of wisdom away to the Treasury and ask them to relook at the figures, but I don't think it's likely they would have advised me to take the measures that I took today if that was the case. But I will go and ask them to look at it again.
Peter Aldous.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend to his new role, and I commend him for the prompt and decisive action that he has already taken. He has rightly said that the government wished to protect the most vulnerable, and with this in mind, taking into account the parameters that he has already set out, can I urge him, as soon as practically possible, to confirm that benefits will be uprated in line with inflation? In doing so, he will be removing a burden of worry and anxiety that is hanging over a great many people in this country at the current time.
Well, that issue has been raised by a number of colleagues from across the House, and as I said previously, I thank him for raising it. I understand how important the issue is. He'll understand that I'm not in a position to make any commitments in any area today. We will make our decisions as soon as we can and then bring them back to this House, but I hear what he says.
Ellie Reeves.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. SE20 Cycles in my constituency is a popular bike shop and the proud home of Penge Cycle Club. The owner, Winnie, is facing an energy bill of £11,000 before winter has even started. And it's only through the support of a local crowdfunder that Winnie is able to keep his doors open. So what does the Chancellor have to say to SE20 Cycles and the thousands of small businesses like them that face higher energy bills, higher rents, higher prices, and frankly the terrifying uncertainty because of this government's incompetence?
Well, we introduced the energy price guarantee precisely because we care about families and also businesses that are facing unexpected increases in their fuel bills. So I'll write to her to tell her exactly how we're supporting small businesses in her constituency.
Richard Holden.
Deputy Speaker, and I would really like to welcome my right honourable friend to his place as a great first step in restoring trust and confidence in our economy. And while I welcome the broad package of energy support measures, can I echo sentiments of other honourable members and those of my constituents from Cowshill Village Hall, who I met this weekend up in rural Weardale, who are very concerned about the extra costs of being off-grid. And if you could look at that over the next couple of weeks, it would be massively appreciated. And would you also keep working on that broader energy security measures so that we can ensure that we don't face this situation again in the future?
Chancellor.
Absolutely do that.
Gavin Newlands.
Brexit merited not one mention in his statement, because the truth is, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this economic crisis was baked in when his party committed to a hard Brexit. It was just a matter of when, although the Prime Minister substantially brought that forward. The then Member of Parliament for South West Surrey said that service levels and investment in public service would be massively impacted by Brexit. So did the Chancellor agree with the then Member for South West Surrey?
I'm very sorry. I missed the last part of his question, and so I want to give him. I'm not sure if he's allowed to say it again, but on the first part of his question, I would just simply say that when it comes to Brexit, the UK grew faster than the Eurozone countries since 2016. So I don't accept his analysis.
James Morris.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I warmly welcome the Chancellor to his place? He, more than anybody else, will be aware of the pressures that are in the health and social care system as we enter a difficult winter. And would he be able to give reassurance to the people working in the NHS and to patients across the country that he will maintain levels of funding necessary to cope with those winter pressures and also cope with the challenges which the health and social care system will face in the future?
Well, I'm one of, I think, only two Chancellors who has been Health Secretary, so I'm very, very aware of the pressures in the NHS. And I'm not making any commitments, but I would say that when it comes to the NHS, the whole country wants to make sure that it's able to cope with not just winter crises, but also the pressures that we've had since COVID. So we will look at that very, very carefully. But I would also like to see reform in the way NHS funding is spent, because I think we can do better with the large sums that we spend already.
Barbara Keeley.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. After the government's disastrous mini-budget, I heard from a constituent, a single-person first-time buyer, who had been saving to buy a home for 7 years and who can no longer afford a mortgage. She described that as a kick in the teeth. What does the Chancellor of the Exchequer say to my constituent and to all those ordinary people across the country battling price rises, struggling with increased mortgage costs and having their pensions hit because of the effects of 3 weeks of instability caused by the economic incompetence of the current Prime Minister and her government?
We've listened to her concerns, we've changed our policies as a result, but also, in fairness, the rise in interest rates is not just because of actions taken by the UK government in the last few weeks, it's because of global factors, and we will do everything we can going forward to shield people like your constituent from those global factors, but we can't do everything.
Dr. Ben Spencer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend for his statement today. Look, it's absolutely right that the government prioritises above all else economic stability and accordingly makes the necessary but difficult decisions given the challenging circumstances. Can you confirm that pursuing a high-growth economy remains central to the vision and will you continue to pursue policies of reducing the tax burden as circumstances and the economy allows?
I'm happy to confirm to my honourable friend both those points.
Wendy Chamberlain.
I'd like to return to a theme that I picked up at the Plan for Growth 3 weeks ago, which is carers, and particularly unpaid carers, who are finding, because of carers allowance, they either basically cannot work at all because of carers allowance, or it means that they're struggling to make ends meet. Will the Chancellor confirm, are we going to see inflationary increases to benefits? But if not, is he going to consider expanding the means-tested cost of living payments to include those on carers allowance, or at the very least will they just allow people to work more before their carers allowance is impacted?
Well, I've said, and she will have heard me say, that I'm not announcing decisions on any individual areas because of the gravity of the situation we face. But the other issues she raises about carers allowance, I will happily write to her on anyway, because I think these are all things we keep under review.
Jason McCartney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I very much welcome the fact we now have an entrepreneur in 11 Downing Street. I also welcome the fact that the Chancellor over the weekend has been speaking once again about compassionate conservatism, supporting those in our communities most in need whilst striving for sustainable growth. Now, I know my right honourable friend isn't making any spending commitments today, but does he agree with me in principle one of the best ways that we can support and create sustainable jobs in our communities is by continuing to invest in our levelling up agenda across communities in our country?
Chancellor.
Absolutely. I'm very happy to confirm that I agree with that in principle.
Lisa Cameron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Two very important conferences are taking place in the UK this week, the Digital Asset Summit and the Bitcoin Collective Summit, supporting the government's aim towards a UK cryptocurrency hub. The all-party parliamentary group of digital assets and cryptocurrency that I chair are keen to meet with Treasury to hear about his commitments towards regulation and consumer protection, but also to take forward the vast potential of this area in terms of job creation and innovation and growth.
Thank you very much. I know she's been in discussions with the Financial Secretary to the Treasury, and I know he'd be delighted to communicate with her further because she obviously has a lot of expertise in this area.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. For 3.5 weeks, the government have gambled with people's pensions, with their mortgages and their futures. I noticed the Chancellor in his list of people he has met didn't mention the pensions regulator, and yet pensions have taken a significant hit over this period. So can he say that pensions schemes will not be deemed as unviable over this period, will get the support they need from government and ensure that they are stable for the future, both defined contribution and defined benefit schemes?
Well, I have had many discussions on pensions issues with the Governor of the Bank of England, who, as she knows, has taken extensive action to protect the viability of pension funds. And she will be as pleased as I was that he announced today that he thinks that he has basically succeeded in resolving that issue in nearly every case.
Chris Stevens.
Madam Deputy Speaker, so can I ask the Chancellor if he will commit to the House that he will also, as part of his decision-making, take notice of social consequences and a need for social stability, because Food Aid Charities handed a petition to Downing Street today saying that they are struggling to meet the demands of their fellow citizens. And will he meet those charities to impress upon them the urgent need to uprate benefits in line with inflation?
Well, I'm meeting with many different people to discuss that very issue, but I'm afraid I can only point them to my earlier answer that I'm not announcing any decisions on it today.
Clive Efford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor has taken plaudits for having calmed the markets, but he hasn't resolved the problem. He's just stopped it getting worse. Gilts are still going to cost more, borrowing is going to cost more for the government. In perpetuity going forwards, that's going to impact on people's mortgage rates. Does he expect repossessions to go up in the coming future? And if so, what action will he take in order to assist those people who find themselves in that situation because of the Prime Minister's reckless budget?
Because I don't want that to happen, that I've taken the very difficult decisions today.
Christine Jardine.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm sure the Chancellor would agree that certainty is key to stability for businesses. So, as has already been mentioned by one or two honourable friends, the Scotch whisky industry and the spirits industry generally is now facing uncertainty because of the U-turn that the Chancellor has done on freezing duty. And they have no certainty about whether it will now go up or when it will go up or when they will even know. So can the Chancellor commit to letting them know at an early date, as soon as possible, what actually is going to happen to a vital industry for so many of our constituencies?
We will conclude the decisions on what we're going to do in terms of excise duty reform generally as quickly as we can. But for now, I'm afraid the difficult decision that I announced today stands, and we are not going to be able to proceed with the freeze from next February.
Barry Gardner.
I genuinely welcome many of the announcements that the Chancellor has made today and the stability that they will produce. And I wish him well, Madam Deputy Speaker, for all our sakes in his new role. I want to focus his attention back on the young couple seeking to purchase their first home and their fear that the housing shortage means that the cut in stamp duty will not actually benefit them, but will simply raise the price of the property and benefit existing homeowners. Or has he managed in the last 24 hours and his party to abolish the law of supply and demand?
No, I haven't, and we recognise the need for more housing and the problems in the planning system, and they will be top of our mind as we announce reforms to restore economic growth.
Cherry.
Mr. Speaker, last month I pressed the Government to commit to extending the short-term energy price support announced for business and said they couldn't afford to wait for the 3-month review because they need certainty. Today we hear the same uncertainty is to be imposed on every single household across my Edinburgh South West constituency and indeed across the United Kingdom because the Chancellor is reversing on the Prime Minister's promise to give energy support to households for 2 years. My constituents live in one of the most energy-rich countries in the world, and yet they're facing crippling bills. Does the Chancellor think that's a good example of the dividend he says Scotland gets from being in the Union?
Well, I do think that not just Scotland, but England, Wales and Northern Ireland get a fantastic dividend from being in the Union. But let me say to her, we have not reneged on our commitment to help people on low incomes with energy bills next year. We've said we're going to review it and we need a more targeted scheme, but we absolutely want to give help to her constituents and everyone's constituents.
Stephen Timms.
Mr. Speaker, does the Chancellor recognise that there was a very heavy blow to the lowest income households in the country last April when social security benefits were uprated by 3.1% and inflation was nearly 10%? It was justified at the time on the basis that's what the regular uprating formula delivered and that the same formula would be used next April, assurance given by both the then Chancellor and the Prime Minister. Will he recognise, as he reflects on his announcements in a couple of weeks' time, that this is a matter, yes, of compassion, but also of fairness?
I do accept that, and I think compassion and fairness are two sides of the same coin, and I've told him that whilst I can't give the answers to any of these decisions, it will be through those prisms that we make these very difficult choices.
Patrick Grady.
Speaker, how will the concerns and experiences of the nations and regions of the United Kingdom be represented on his new advisory panel? And what, if any, are the Barnett consequentials of today's amendment for the devolved administration budgets?
On the latter point, I'll write to him, and on the former point, I'm very confident that the advisers I have will be able to speak for the whole United Kingdom.
Nick Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, could I press the Chancellor? The defined benefit pensions market has been in turmoil. Schemes nearly folded, and the Bank of England has spent £20 billion to steady the market. So can I ask the Chancellor how he's going to grip this better so pensioners can have confidence in their schemes?
Well, I believe the Bank of England has taken very important action, and I just refer him to what the Governor of the Bank of England said today and his confidence that those issues have been largely resolved.
Alan Dorrans.
Madam Deputy Speaker, good evening. Madam Deputy Speaker, earlier this afternoon the Chancellor announced the formation of a new Economic Advisory Council. Can he confirm they will be independent and they are not major donors to the Conservative Party seeking to gain influence in government policy?
But I can confirm they will be independent, and I can confirm that there will be no improper influence exerted, and I can confirm that he'll be very pleased to hear that all donations to the Conservative Party are vetted and legal.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've listened carefully to what the Chancellor has said. Our public services are on their knees after 12 years of Tory misrule. They really can't cope with any further cuts. In contrast, the very richest have seen their wealth soar threefold over the past decade. So surely, rather than further cuts to our public services, wouldn't it be fairer to impose a wealth tax on the very richest in our society?
The trouble with those kinds of taxes is that they end up inhibiting the wealth-creating capacity of the economy to fund the very public services that he supports. And so I do support wealthier people paying more tax, but only when it creates more resources to put into the public services we all need.
Stephen Flynn.
A government that Scotland didn't vote for, a Chancellor who's leading the way despite Scotland not voting for him, and of course he's about to impose swinging public sector cuts upon Scotland that again we did not vote for. With that prospectus, is it any surprise that the people of Scotland are going to choose a different path?
Well, I'm very happy that he's concerned about what the people of Scotland voted for, which was to remain in the United Kingdom.
Karen Smith.
Deputy Speaker, for the past year I found myself agreeing regularly with the Right Honourable Gentleman when he warned that the workforce burnout across the NHS and social care had reached emergency levels and is an extraordinary dangerous risk to the functioning of both services. Does he stand by that assessment today, and will he now be supporting an independent workforce plan?
It's very difficult to uninvent or unsay things that you've said on the floor of this House. I'm not going to make any commitments today, but let me say that in my time as Chair of the Health and Social Care Select Committee, I learned a great deal about how the NHS functions, as I did indeed when I was Health Secretary, and I hope that will be useful to me in my role.
Patricia Gibson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The dog-like devotion that the Tory branch office members in Scotland have for their London bosses was hopelessly exposed when they urged the Scottish Government to follow the disastrous tax plans of the soon-to-be former Prime Minister. Hours later, the same branch office members applauded October's Chancellor's abandonment of those plans in a desperate effort to stay on script. Does the current Chancellor agree that those in the Tory branch office in Scotland should apologise to the people of Scotland for seeking to railroad the Scottish Government down a path which would have caused even more pain for struggling households?
Well, the Tory government that she so hates has shown itself in the last few days to be willing to take tough and difficult decisions if they're right for the country. So here's a tough and difficult decision for her. Independence will make Scotland poorer in every single way, so why don't you abandon it?
Yasin.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor has reversed most of his Prime Minister's budget, yet is still talking about spending cuts to pay for the fine mess his government has got this country into. Tory austerity broke our precious NHS, which he had a hand in. Now he is in charge of purse strings. Will he put his money where his mouth is, invest in NHS, implement the workforce plan he knows is desperately needed?
Well, before I was Chancellor, with great respect to the Honourable Gentleman, I think I did put my money where my mouth is, because when I became Health Secretary, we were funding the NHS at the OECD average, and now it's the 5th highest in the OECD. So I've started to fix years of disastrous Labour underfunding.
Jim Shannon. Sorry, you threw me off there. I was looking around to see who it was. Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, for calling me. Can I say how very pleased I am to see the Chancellor in his place, and I wish him well. I think his House wishes him well in the job he has to do. Northern Ireland are global leaders in areas like cybersecurity and advanced manufacturing, and is also the top location in the UK outside of London for foreign direct investment. However, the rate of economic activity in Northern Ireland is higher than anywhere in Great Britain. This costs the economy some £16 billion annually. Can I ask the Chancellor this? Can he give any indication as to whether Northern Ireland will receive a fair proportion of the levelling up funding under round 2 rather than the first phase where the 3% shared target was missed? Thank you.
Well, as he knows, I'm not announcing any decisions today, but it would always be my intention to give a fair deal to Northern Ireland, which is an incredibly precious part of our union.
The new Chancellor, October's Chancellor, said with no small measure of smug superiority and constitutional illiteracy that, in his opinion, the 4 members he identified of his Economic Advisory Board, 3 members, as I counted, of large accountancy firms and 1 former insider from the Treasury, were well equipped to usher in the best possible economic plan for the devolved nations. That's clearly patent nonsense, but has it occurred to the Chancellor to invite the finance ministers from the devolved nations to form part of his Economic Advisory Board, or is that beneath him?
I have regular contact and will continue to have... excuse me, would you let me answer? I have regular... Sorry, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was hoping the Honourable Gentleman would let me answer. I have regular contact with my finance minister counterparts in the devolved nations, and indeed the Chief Secretary of the Treasury had discussions today. But this Economic Council is something different. This is about trying to make sure that we deal effectively with the instability that we've seen in the markets, which is mainly London-based, and we want to make sure that it doesn't happen again. So I think I've got 4 fantastic people for that role.
Colin Markwood.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. My constituents of Birmingham, Perry Barr, and the people of the West Midlands who work tirelessly to be able to secure homes for their families now look on in disbelief as they are having to focus on soaring energy bills in addition to crippling mortgage interest rates. Can the Chancellor explain how he will ensure my constituents will not lose all they have worked for and they do not need to make a choice between heating, eating or keeping their homes?
Because we are taking difficult decisions, we will do whatever it takes to restore economic stability. That is the biggest single thing we can do.
Marie Rimmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could the Chancellor explain to me the announcements today on tax? Will they have implication on the primary legislation that the government is looking to introduce to enable the offer on tax and simplifying regulations on the investment zones? This was an in-principle policy published on the 24th of September, and then expressions of interest asked for on the 2nd of October, and a rushed you've got to have them in by the 14th of October. There's very little detail for people to make really informed decisions. And no, I'll write again if the Bayes Secretary of State remains the same. I've written to 2 on one really good scheme, which is going to be massive. And my constituency are 2 of the most deprived boroughs, Knowsley, second deprived in the country, and they've had nothing yet. And then we've got St Helens, which is high up there. But the schemes are just wonderful. What was the impact? Sorry, I've sat down. My knees.
Because we're getting towards the end of our questions, I will reply to her letter. I don't believe there is any implications from what I've said today, but if I'm wrong, I'll let her know.
Munira Wilson.
Deputy Speaker, if the Chancellor is serious about growth, he has to be serious about education. Yet school governors in my constituency recently described the funding situation they face as soul-destroying. One said, we've trimmed everything we can possibly trim. They're considering laying off teaching assistants, delaying building repairs and axing school trips. So could the Chancellor of the Exchequer tell parents and teachers in my constituency what else he wants schools to cut to pay for the Prime Minister's economic incompetence?
Well, I want to do everything I can to protect our precious public services. I totally agree with her about the link between education and economic growth, but I also think it's about social justice. I want to have fantastic schools for all our children, from whatever their background. That's why I've taken the difficult decisions I've announced today.
Cat Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I know the Chancellor has already performed quite a lot of U-turns today, but can I invite him to make another U-turn, specifically on fracking? Given that renewable energy is 9 times cheaper, wouldn't it make good economic sense to invest in renewables rather than fracking?
Well, we're not going to do fracking unless it has local consent. But can I also say, as someone who believes passionately we've got to do more on climate change, it is not helping climate change to import hydrocarbons from other countries and say that, as a result, we are being very virtuous in reducing our own emissions. We need to do what it takes to reduce overall emissions.
Peter Grant.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Chancellor in advance for what he's promised to publish over the next 2 weeks, because it will be the starkest ever confirmation of the awful price of better together. Unless you're a banker on a bumper bonus, which not many of my constituents are, they're looking at higher food prices, higher fuel prices, higher mortgages, reducing wages in real terms, falling benefits in real terms, and savage real terms cuts in public services. Alternatively, my constituents could be building towards a Scotland that's creating 385,000 jobs in renewable energy, producing between 3 and 4 times as much energy as we need, and who knows, maybe even selling it on at mates rates to our friends and neighbours as long as they treat us well. I respect the Chancellor's right to dismiss that future. I think he's doing himself an injustice by basing his dismissal on blind evidence-light dogma rather than looking at the facts. But will he accept that it is not for him, for anyone in those benches, or indeed for anyone in these benches, to deny my constituents the right to choose between those two futures?
I can accept that he and I are different in that I am totally emotionally committed to the union and it's part of my identity, and he feels differently about that. But what I can't accept is that it would be anything other than madness for every household in Scotland to want to leave the United Kingdom, which would make them much worse off.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Deputy Speaker, the Chancellor spoke of cuts, albeit shrouded in compassionate conservatism, a paradox if ever there was one. But surely he must realise how serious things are in public services at the moment. In Salford alone, the council is sitting on a 16 million shortfall due to soaring energy costs. That's on top of slashing their previous budget in half and slashing their staff rotas by over half. How can he possibly put forward compassionate cuts upon services that are barely able to function at the moment?
It's because I want to be able to invest in public services like the ones that she talks about that I think it's so important to take tough economic decisions at times like this. And all I would say is that whilst she and I have a different viewpoint on many issues, her party has supported the decisions that I have taken today, and I think that was the right thing.
Martin Day.
Madam Deputy Speaker, having heard the Chancellor's televised statement earlier, gilt prices rose and the yield on them fell, thereby reducing their effective interest rate. Does the Chancellor recognise that the markets have effectively factored in the removal from office of the Prime Minister, and what does he think will happen if this does not happen?
I'm afraid one of the first lessons I was told as Chancellor is never to speculate on why markets do what they do, and I'm not going to break that today.
Carol Monaghan.
The Chancellor has repeatedly refused to answer questions about uprating of benefits. But with the Resolution Foundation briefing last week that they expect 2 million more people to be pushed into absolute poverty, can he guarantee to the House that any attempt to balance books or to steady the ship or whatever other expression we're going to use is not going to be made at the expense of those that are already struggling.
Hear, hear, hear.
Well, as I've said, and I am happy to repeat, all these decisions will be taken through the prism of the impact on the most vulnerable people in society.
Sam Tarry.
Mr. Speaker, many constituents in Ilford South were very glad that the last Labour Prime Minister had the foresight to make the Bank of England independent when that mini-budget a few weeks ago almost tanked 6 pension funds in the UK. Madam Deputy Speaker, what I'd like to know from our new Chancellor today is what he's going to do when there's at least one more that is still at risk to ensure that pensioners in Ilford South and the millions across the country who are not only angry but frightened can seek those reassurances from the new Chancellor that you will do something concrete to shore up pension funds, not just over the next few weeks, but the next few years.
Hear, hear. I think we've had very decisive action from the Bank of England to do exactly that, and I hope he's encouraged by what the Governor of the Bank of England said today about his belief that he has largely solved those issues.
And finally, the prize for patience and perseverance goes to Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think I now know what it feels like to have the knees of the honourable member for Strangford. No. It's a fleeting thought. It's a fleeting thought. It's gone. It's gone. Madam Deputy Speaker, pubs and hospitality businesses in my seat of St Albans are really up against it. Sucker Punch is a bar that closed its doors just a couple of days ago because they can no longer continue. Others are clinging on until Christmas, and we know that around the country hospitality businesses are saying they're going to go into complete hibernation until the spring, and that means redundancies. So would the Chancellor confirm that he does understand that hospitality is one of the sectors that is most affected and will therefore attract support? And will he also look again at this broken business rate system that is killing our pubs and high streets whilst letting multinationals off the hook?
Well, I think another of the promises that I now vainly wish I hadn't made in the summer as to policies that we should do is a fundamental review of business rates. So I have a great deal of sympathy for her on that front, and I will happily look at those issues. I don't want to promise that we're going to make any progress in the next 2 weeks because there's so many other things we have to consider, but what she said has been well heard, and I too congratulate her for her patience.
Thank you. Thank you. That concludes the statement. I thank the Chancellor for